I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Pavel Trantina, Chairperson of the Economic and Social Committee Coordination Group on Volunteering and the co-chair of the Legal Framework Working Group of the EYV 2011 Alliance.
May I have the remote control? Thank you very much, Martin. Good morning to all of you. First of all, I must reveal myself as a double agent. Yep, sorry to do that. It all started with scouting some 22 years ago, and I had an opportunity to represent Scouts in the National Youth Council. And this is the reason why I can be here on behalf of two institutions, or one institution and one organization. The first institution is the European Economic and Social Committee. The other one is the Youth Forum, and through the Youth Forum I was active in, and I'm still active in the EYV 2011 Alliance. So let's start with my first hat, let's say, which is the European Economic and Social Committee. You probably know that EESC is an EU institution. It's an advisory body to the Parliament, to the Council, and to the Commission. And our main task is to issue opinions on different aspects of EU legislation and EU policy making. And within the EESC, I had the pleasure to chair the coordination group for the European Year of Volunteering. The EESC has devoted considerable attention to volunteering throughout the years, and I would say that the most significant expression of that was our opinion on voluntary activities from the year 2006. Already there, as probably the first EU institution, we have called for having a European year devoted to volunteering, and we were glad that thanks to the involvement of many NGOs, this became the reality. We were also calling for the white paper on volunteering, which has not become a reality yet, unfortunately. And we were calling for drafting the European Charter for Volunteering. And here we have an example of how this wish could be fulfilled. We were also calling for a suitable legal framework for volunteering in the EU member states. And hopefully, thanks to the work of the Alliance, this could become, this horizon might become a bit closer now. We were calling for adequate funding, of course, because this is a precondition for voluntary activities. We were calling for recognition both social and both recognition of skills and competences acquired through volunteering. And of course, we always mention the importance of ensuring equal opportunities of volunteers. So what have we done in this year, in the year 2011? We've organized 4 public hearings on different topics related to the themes of EYV 2011 Alliance working groups. And those hearings were done in cooperation with the working groups of the Alliance. And our aim was to bring all the stakeholders together. That means the NGOs, volunteer providers, but also the European Commission and others. The EESC has that richness in the fact that it brings together 3 groups of people together. That's employers, representatives of chambers of commerce, associations of trade and industry, but also direct representatives of employers, employees represented by the trade unions, and NGOs of various kinds. The EESC was also co-hosting several events, notably 2 of them, second EU-level thematic conference on volunteering, and second volunteering convention and stakeholder conference, which Lena already mentioned. We wanted to give the space to the discussions on the charter, on the draft charter of volunteering. And we were hosting many other meetings, including the meetings of the Alliance Steering Group. Because our house as we call it, is the house of civil society in Europe. And I think that actually this has been proven by this. And we were present at many meetings, of course. What are we going in the years to come? Well, our first task is to draft an opinion on Commission communication on volunteering, which should be adopted in March 2012. I'm in charge of drafting it, so keep fingers crossed for me to do it in the right way. And we'll be issuing several opinions on other EU policies affecting volunteering, such as promotion and validation of non-formal and informal learning, European Skills Passport, which doesn't seem to be, in its first version, a good answer to our calls, I must say. Of course, we are very sensitive about the future of the EU, of the EU funding programs. And definitely we want to keep the Youth in Action, the current Youth in Action program separate from other lifelong learning programs. And of course, we'll be devoting our attention to the year 2012, but also to the year 2013, because we see, or we feel that this year shouldn't be only about European Year of Citizens, but about the true European Year of active citizenship. And of course, we are open to host many other meetings and discussions related to volunteering, so you can count on us. My second hat is the Alliance hat, where I had the pleasure to co-chair the working group on the legal frameworks. Here you have a flavor or a presentation of organizations which were involved in the work of this working group. So it was ENCSO, AFSO, Scouts, European Volunteer Center, European Youth Forum, Red Cross, and Age Platform Europe. And I had the pleasure to cooperate in co-chairing with Niels Christian from ENCSO. What were the objectives of our working group? First, we wanted to map research on the legal status of volunteers in Europe. We have done our own research, but we were benefiting from the research done by the European Youth Forum, so thank you for doing that. And through that, we collected concerns in terms of legal barriers and bottlenecks caused by legal provisions at any level that result in limiting volunteering in Europe. The last of the three objectives was obviously advocating for recommendations for improvement of the legal status of volunteers and a clear status for volunteers everywhere in Europe. And here are the recommendations, which you can find in section 3 of the PAVE. And I'll just go briefly through them because you can read them and it's probably better to have a proper discussion about them. A freedom to volunteer. We are convinced that everyone should have the freedom to volunteer and nobody should be prevented, but also nobody should be forced to do voluntary work, neither for public nor for private institutions. The second recommendation is about equal treatment of all volunteers in Europe. We simply want the EU and the member states to adopt a common approach to volunteering involving a stronger role for the EU when it comes to determining the legal environment for volunteering. It doesn't mean that we would call for any unification in this area, but we simply want to have some standards or some basic conditions ensured everywhere in EU. We were also calling for the adequate social protection for those doing volunteering, and that mainly includes health, accident and liability insurance. And of course, member states should support volunteers and voluntary organizations financially to cover these expenses through a sustainable framework. Taxation was another very big issue, and here we tackled the reimbursement of voluntary expenses exemption from VAT, but also tax for donations. Another big area was the visa issues, of course. And we want the EU and the member states to consider facilitating the entry of EU territory for the purpose of doing voluntary work within the EU. Here I would love to thank the European Commission for coming with the initiative to introduce a special visa category for volunteers. This might be a very good step forward. Of course, migration policy falls into the responsibility of the member states, so we'll see what are the reactions of the member states afterwards. And it's up to us to push our representatives in the Council in the good direction. Further recommendations deal with criminal records checks. Some member states require it from their volunteers, and we are of the opinion that they should require compulsory criminal records checks for volunteers only in cases in which it is absolutely necessary to ensure the high quality of volunteers and voluntary organization work, or to protect vulnerable persons. Further recommendation was about encouragement of companies to support employees who are also engaged in voluntary activities in emergency situations, and there are a lot of them. Simply, we think that member states should adopt measures to facilitate the volunteering of staff members of private as well as public employers. And these provisions should include compensation measures for employers or persons who are also volunteers and who, in cases of emergency situation, have to leave their workplace to do voluntary work for the benefit of the public. Public tender. That's a sensitive issue, actually. But we still want to contribute to the recognition of volunteers as an asset in public tenders. You know that now public tenders are based, especially in health and social sector, are based on on creation of new jobs, simply. And we want to establish something equal to that, not only creation jobs, but also involving volunteers and capacity building. Monitoring of the legal framework is necessary, of course, as every process. And we think that the EU and the member states should regularly monitor the status and the development of legal conditions for volunteering in order to ensure the implementation of volunteering policies and more favorable conditions for volunteers and volunteer involving organizations, while preventing creation of new barriers. Volunteer involving organizations should be involved in this process. And last but not least, recommendation is about Charter on volunteering. We are encouraging the EU to adopt a European Charter on the rights of a volunteer, which would outline the basic principles on a rights-based approach, which was described by Lena, to volunteering, and to apply them when designing or redesigning volunteering policies and legislation. A charter could include, inter alia, the subjects that I now mentioned, and could be structured as follows. First, to have a broad definition of volunteer involving organizations and volunteering. Second, to deal with the rights of a volunteer, responsibilities of a volunteer, rights and responsibilities of a volunteer involving organizations, but also responsibilities of public authorities. Let's hope that this might become a reality. Thank you for your attention. I'm open to any questions or clarifications, and you can reach me through this email, just in case that we don't have the opportunity to talk to each other in the corridors, for instance. Thank you.